Alright, so about 2 months ago, I released a game called Dealing with Dice, made by me and Kazero, a Balatro-inspired incremental dice game where you chain together different builds of dice to make as much money as possible. Now, you can also check out my other Dealing with Dice video to learn more about the game, but after it released it got quite popular with people trying to break it a lot, including the leaderboards as well, so I decided to update it. First though, before I tell you about the update, I want to tell you what's happened since, and then I'll go over all the new update content. And I've also made a Discord for all my games like Dealing with Dice, where I can post new content for the games and where people keep posting broken builds of the game. But anyway, when I first uploaded the game for hitting 100 subs, a lot of people were trying it out for the first time, and for some context, Elite was the highest rarity at the time, and the day after I did Fortunate, but people found out the most efficient build was to spam Watermelon Dice, because normally they double red credits when they roll, but because they affect all dice and multiply each other, it was more efficient to just spam a ton of Watermelon Dice. Now, I don't normally mind people making overpowered builds, but this was just using one dice and not my super amazing and cool system of mixing different dice together to make really cool combos. So once some dice actually got added to the game, some real builds started to emerge, and the first high rolling one was made by Balatro-like. I don't know how you say his name, but that's probably correct, as you can see here anyway. Now, other than it using Tarot for some reason, it was quite a smart build, as the raw dice rolls purple credits, and purple credits multiply the total roll instead of adding to it, and the bamboo will re-roll themselves each time a 1 or below is rolled, and the lucky block dice tend to roll a 1 and below, but also lucky block dice also re-roll a random dice excluding other lucky block dice, causing them to re-roll the royal dice even more, making them quite an efficient build. But the main thing that's helping this build is the starter dice at the end called the stone dice, and the stone dice is a very simple ability. When it rolls, it buffs the outcome of the leftmost dice. Now that makes a dice roll more credits as well, and the raw dice most of the time rolls a 0 and rarely a 2. So when people found out that you could actually buff the raw dice, this quickly became one of the best builds in the game. Now for a while that build dominated and kept Balatro-like at the top of the leaderboard, but then I released Update 2, which basically just added an amount of dices that I don't really remember. Now out of those dices, a new strategy spawned. One thing that people learnt before the update is that they could make something called a resin circuit. Well, I'm naming that now, it hasn't actually got a name, but where normal resin dice can re-roll the other dice next to it, but they also affect each other as well. So you could possibly have it so a resin dice keeps activating each other, that keep triggering the effects over and over, and this is because a resin, if it rolls its highest or lowest outcome, causes it to shock itself that actually triggers the effect. But this becomes way more efficient when mixing it with a volatile dice, and the volatile dice has a chance to shock all of the dice when rolled, and you can also mix it with the carving dice, which when it rolls it reactivates other dice, like the volatile dice, it deactivates itself. I mean, you can make loops that roll over and over like this, but on its own it isn't really too good. But then with the new update, people found out two new things: that they could mix a thunder dice into a circuit so it would always go off, and that due to the volatile dice going off, you could re-roll basically any dice anywhere as long as there's a resin next to it. Now normally this would still be worse than the other build, but because of two players, Drake Says Hi and Rule 42, found out that mixing two new dice into it makes it way more efficient. Along with the stone dice, it uses the wizard dice, that when a red or blue outcome is rolled, it buffs every dice for each black outcome rolled, and it also has a chance to roll a purple outcome itself as well, just like the raw dice. But then the build would also use the diamond dice, that when a blue outcome is rolled, it multiplies that dice's buff and then deactivates itself, and only one dice here is rolling a blue outcome, and that's the wizard dice. Now at the moment that build is the most efficient, and there was a lot of in-between builds too that I can't really find, but now it's time to get onto the new stuff coming. This is probably one of the bigger updates to come to the game that should add a lot more strategy. So first off, I'm adding a ton of starter dice, so there's a bit more variation in some of the starter builds, but also the highest rarity jackpot was missing some dices. Oh, and there's also a whole new rarity above jackpot called flush, because like poker, casinos and Balatro. I love Balatro. Now, other than adding a ton of dice, with some of them being made by the community, like Drake Says Hi, Kaplan and Rule 42, there are also a lot of new gimmicks as well, like the neon dice that causes the dice adjacent to it to have a spread ability that causes, for example, like a stone dice that would normally affect the leftmost dice to also affect the dice next to the leftmost dice, or the resin dice wouldn't just affect the adjacent dice, but the adjacent dice. And some dice can even steal and give abilities too, like the brass dice that can give other dice the ability of the stone dice, or the cardboard dice that copy the leftmost dice's ability and the rolls of the dice right of it. And some dices even cause abilities to trigger more than once, like abilities that should only happen once at the start of the turn, like the engine dice, that every 4 times it rolls it re-triggers all start of the loop effects. But also dice can have variants, like this dice for example could be golden and it gets like its outcome multiplied by 3 on top of its level, or a silver dice that rolls even even more than the normal, or like a monochrome that steals rolls of another dice, well, the colour anyway, and maybe even more to come in the future. And dices also have bootlegs, with some only having one while others have more, but bootlegs act basically exactly the same, other than the art is made by other people, or Drake says hi, or Kaplan, or Drake again, and they're very rare in some cases though. Now, I have had a lot of other ideas for this update, they can be saved for a future one, but looking past the update for a minute, a lot of other things have happened, like a few people have made fan games with the game with various levels of quality, like this person that just re-uploaded it, or this person that made a hacked no clickbait 3am version where you can get like any dice for free, but one of the more interesting ones was made by Kaplan called Kaplan's Casino, where you can add custom dice to it, and sadly you can only edit them visually and their rolls as well, so you can't give them custom effects, but it's still fun to mess around with. Now, if you liked how Dealing with Dice looked and wanted to try it out, there will be a link to both the game and the server in the description, and the third update should be out like as soon as I'm posting it, so feel free to check it out. Oh, and also people are probably going to end up breaking the leaderboard again, because it's already at like 500 quadrillion at the moment of making this video, but also Kazero, you know, that person I mentioned once at the start that helped me, they're also making a video about the game, so don't forget to check that out. Anyway, goodbye.
"2023 just got even brazier. Scientists have recently discovered you're gay."